We must all unite in truth, not in politics nor religion, and together we will save America. Hello, I'm John Michael Chambers, and welcome to the Intel and Insights broadcast with Juan 7, published every Thursday at 6 p.m. Eastern. I also publish a monthly one-hour program titled The 40,000-Foot View, published the first Friday of each month. Please visit and bookmark johnmichaelchambers.com, where you'll find all these broadcasts, as well as follow me on my Rumble channel to view these episodes. Also, be sure to visit thejennifermack.com, thejennifermack.com, and avail yourself to an arsenal of films, books, and swag for the MAGA movement. And now we've got about 30 minutes with Juan 7. Juan has been serving this nation since the time of Ronald Reagan. He's very well connected. His clandestine assignments and self-imposed directives, many of which are unknown to the public, play a critical role in protecting this nation and its interests for decades. A good friend and most valuable voice and resource for this new media. Please welcome back each and every week and at this very moment. Juan, thanks for joining us today.
Hey, good to see you there, John.
Nice view there. Very beautiful.
Yeah, actually, this is Chinatown down here in Yokohama.
Very nice. Down in Yokohama, as Warren Zevon once said. Anyway, beautiful. I'm a little south of you here in Thailand on the beautiful island of Koh Samui. But let's get into the subject matter. We're talking about 10 Days of Darkness, The Boy Who Cried Wolf. We first heard, if I'm not mistaken, the 10 Days of Darkness from the cue boards. It's been some years now, and ever since then, the podcasters and influence, etc., we've all sort of misforecasted, oh, this must be the 10 Days of Darkness, and so many times throughout this period of many years now, misforecasting, perhaps jumping the gun concerning speculative dates and so forth. So, A, what does this even mean, 10 Days of Darkness? And B, when will it occur? Will it occur? When will it occur? So much information has been forecasted by us that we become the boy who has cried wolf when it comes to forecasting the 10 Days of Darkness. Setting up the question here, my understanding of this is that via the emergency broadcast system, which I have some questions about that in and of itself, I'll get into later. But my understanding is that via the EBS, access to the internet, television, radio, communications, these digital devices, if you will, as I understand, in perhaps over 100 countries, we have the right, for lack of a better term, you'll jump into all this, as I understand, will be shut down. This is how I understand 10 Days of Darkness, as Operation Storm or Storm Operation takes its next move. The president has told us about the world will be shown the truth 24/7 for 10 days, and that we will be safe. I'm talking about the cue boards, not the president, and so forth. And so, and that there is a global military alliance, perhaps 30 countries, under the direction of Commander-in-Chief Donald J. Trump, to take care of business for this 10 Days of Darkness. It seems to make sense to me. The people need the truth with this 80+%, that specific number we've talked about before, having been achieved now. With the last episode we covered about the what will or will not happen, or how will it play out come November, a very tumultuous 9 months ahead, 6, 7 months, whatever it is. And so the 10 Days of Darkness is actually music to my ears. So I guess if you would weigh in on 10 Days of Darkness, shed some light on those 10 Days of Darkness, if you will, Juan.
Well, I've said for several years that before this is over, I was saying this even before the 2020 election, before this is over, it'll be like a near-death experience for America. And I've tried to use as many examples as I could. I've even gone in and used, these NDEs, near-death experiences, of people where they've come back and some will come back with a heavenly account of going to the golden streets and pearly gates and all sorts of things. Others will come back and having had a hellish experience and seeing things that no human eye should have to see, and experiencing things that are just incomprehensible in a normal mind, normal experience. All of the people that come back from these types of experiences, they're changed. I don't know that I had I had a business partner years ago who's long since passed, but he had a heart attack. They did an emergency 5-valve heart bypass surgery, and he'd been a racer and a pretty hard partier and drinker most of his life. Just a fun, cool guy, but at a very young age, I think he was 39 when it happened. Had to have this, catastrophic operation and couldn't go back to work for doing what he was doing from that point forward. And even the racing and other stuff had to stop after that. It was a very, very hard thing. He had not just one, but a couple different near-death experiences. And he had lost someone close to him when he was younger. And we talked about it a couple different times, and he didn't talk. His wife was complaining that he won't talk about it, but it really bothers him a lot, and he has a hard time dealing with it. And so I pulled him aside one day. I says, "Hey, Tom, how are you reconciling that in your mind? With the experience, because he had a hellish experience." And he said he just puts it out of his mind. He couldn't bring himself to address the issues that put him in that situation. He was affected, but the issues that were brought to bear in that moment, he just couldn't go there, and so he pushed it out of his mind. And just before he died, we had gone to an event I was racing in, and he wanted to be there and watch, and he had one of his cars he brought to show and like that. And we had a great weekend, just a fantastic weekend, and we drove back several hours back home in our separate rigs. And then, which really never happened that night, we'd come back on a Sunday afternoon, had a beautiful day that night. He calls me on the phone, and we just had a fantastic conversation and things he wanted to do and changes to one of the businesses that he wanted to make and like that. And right at the end of the conversation, I said, for all of that, Beth laid plans of mice and men. I'm glad you are thinking this way, because it tells me you plan on sticking around. And but you gotta deal with some of these other issues. And then we talked about eternal things, and we had a very important pleasant conversation. Now, he had not addressed the primary issues. What we didn't know when we had that conversation that evening, that mere hours from the end of that conversation, to be exact, about 13 hours after I hung up the phone with him, he was doing some relaxed work, was in the shop under a car, and that was his last moments here on this earth. It was sudden. It was totally catastrophic. He was gone in an instant. As the doctor said after the autopsy, he never even knew what happened to him. He was gone in the blink of an eye. Lights out. He'd had near-death experiences, but he came back. This time he didn't come back, and it was a death experience. America is headed not to a death experience, in my opinion. we've got a shot. He had opportunities to address that. Unfortunately, even in those last hours, we did address some of those issues, reconciling some things between him and his creator. It was amazing it happened the way it did. You know, I could go into so much more, but I'm just, you know, glossing over it. But we as a people, and even the whole planet, are about to get this moment to see where the world is going, where we are going, what's ahead if we didn't address all of these issues. And then the question is, on the far side of this near-death experience for America and this catastrophic near-death experience really for the whole world, this full stop, if you will, in light of what we're about to see and learn and experience, will we continue as we were, or will we make big changes? Will we address the core issues? Will we do it quickly or will we do it slowly? The world is being, you know, taken off a cliff, if you will, with the direction things are going currently. Like Nineveh and the story of Jonah, catastrophe is just ahead, and you see where it's going. Will we stop, make adjustments, changes, to rectify, to reconcile, to correct, and take corrective action for the world? Or will we just barrel on after we have this situation happen? Now, I addressed it from a spiritual standpoint, and that's something that is very personal to every person in this audience. Now I'll answer the question the way you actually asked it. What's it physically look like for the world, and why are we going to have to do it? In the computer systems around the world, there have been programs, there have been access points installed in much of the computerized operations systems around the world have been coming out of China. There's stuff from other places. But the problem is there's real danger and risk for access into those systems to cause disruptive actions going out a long time in the future. To pull out those systems, put in new, it's just not going to happen overnight. One of those systems, though, stands out glaringly above everything else, and that's in the communication systems with the 5G towers. And the problem in those towers is that they have, because they're a type of a transmitter, the wavelengths that they use, from two or more towers. And of course, these towers, just so you understand that in the early version of these broadcast towers, I remember as a little kid seeing the television and radio broadcast towers on a high hill in the city, near the city where I was at. And you could see that flashing red light up there on the hill of multiple of the stations. Several of them had towers up there. And you realize that that's where the signal was coming for your TV set and for the radio. And it was from that one location. And then as you went further and further away, you know, where I take my boat, oftentimes would be 80, 90, 100 miles away. You couldn't get a good signal so far away. The same thing before we had cell phones, we had two-way radio transmitter systems. And so we would communicate, we'd have radios in the cars, and we would actually be able to broadcast both ways. It sounded like a phone, but it was one-way broadcast. We had duplex, which allowed two different radio lines so you could talk and hear at the same time. But it was still done off of radio towers. It was, you know, sensitive to distance. And you might be able to get, in those days, with stuff that was out there 15 or 20 miles, 30 miles. And, you know, if you did stuff, some guys would cheat and have things that make it go a lot further. And then as we got into the cell phone era, areas where these broadcast towers and receivers could be built it was restricted, and so we had a big national oh kind of a lottery, and for broadcast within a certain exact plot on the ground all across the country. And so one of my friends put together a lottery system to get these things, and it became in this big thing. You had to put your money up front and say we want to buy broadcasting for a different region that was cut out on the map all across the country. There were several thousand of them, because the early cell phones would broadcast 10 to 15 miles and receive a signal 10 to 15 miles. So you'd put a little teeny broadcast tower. It's not like the big television station, not like the big radio. It would only broadcast a relatively short distance and receive a relatively short distance. And then the cell phones, because your cell phone you were talking on in those days could broadcast that far. It could broadcast that 10 miles, that 15 miles, and get a signal, and it was analog. And so one of my friends put together a thing. In fact, it was Larry Abraham, very good friend, and to pool some of those investors together with the hope that they would put the money. I think it was $15,000 for every lottery ticket, if you will, for locations. And a lot of those locations, it might be rural Montana or Wyoming, and you don't get enough subscribers to make it pay to put in, $1 million tower at that location. Other places like downtown LA, if you got the license for one of the small plots in downtown LA, crap, it was like hitting the jackpot. And it was a cash machine, because it'd be worth tens and tens and tens of millions of dollars to have that license. So the early cell phones broadcast a pretty good distance, but it was tens of miles. In the 5G, in the earlier versions preceding 5G, the idea was to put lots of small towers that put out very little energy over a very small area. And so they only transmit well for a mile or two. And so you put a whole bunch of small broadcast towers to get more thorough phone coverage across the country. And the towers themselves are much less expensive. And several different operators could then be on the same tower. In the early years, you had to pay to use the towers, and that was the genius of the early cell system, before they switched to these frequencies with shorter range and all digital and all that. The issue with the 5G, though, John, is that if you have two or more of those towers and they're small distance, they're only supposed to transmit a short distance, there's two issues. A minute or two ago, I mentioned that some guys would cheat. You could tweak the energy that you're putting into your transmitter up. You could boost it. And so, for example, in some of the early duplex systems that I had, we used foreign capabilities that weren't generally used in the US in some regions where we had to be able to transmit long distance for stuff that we were doing. That was, we had license to do it. And so I could broadcast much further and receive much further with those boosted signals. In the case of the 5G towers, they're capable of casting at higher energies, but they're restricted to a certain energy that they can do, how powerful the signal is. They are set up also, though, that if you broadcast from a couple of towers, 2 or 3 or even more in some locations, and you can broadcast towards a particular target, they can be steered, if you will. The beam can be steered. They have a stronger signal towards a particular direction. And the the signal is strong enough, it can boil a gallon of water a half a mile away. It's like a microwave without being in the box, if you will. And those, in fact, if you go back to the early COVID stuff, one of my, actually several of my sources out of China, were sending me videos of the people that were supposedly dying of COVID in the Wuhan district. The only problem was these would be people that were walking down the street normally. And I still have all these videos. It's very disturbing. They'd be walking down the street normally, and all of a sudden they would start to get wobbly, and they just fall right over. People come over to help them to see what's going on, and they get the glazed eyes, and suddenly they're unconscious. This wasn't just one or two or 10. I probably have 100 videos of people from cameras, surveillance cameras, other people on the street doing something else with their cell phones, and something happens in the background. And these people were keeling over. What was causing that? Because you're wearing a tracking device, your cell phone. It too can also be a broadcaster. It can provide an interference signal. Your cell phone could actually be weaponized against you. If you're in a particular location where several of these 5G towers are located at, they can be triangulated on you and could take you out in a few moments. And just like those videos that we had the description of. And in fact, it's been alleged, and I think it's accurate, that in the Wuhan district, 25 million, you got to think about that number, 25 million cell phone accounts were closed during the COVID crisis. They never got reactivated. Those people never came back. Was it an economic thing? The contention of a number of the folks involved is that those were all people that died in that COVID thing, but they died not over months and years of the various things that are out there with whether it be the actual disease mechanism, the virus mechanism, but they died rather instantaneously. And of course, we had the accounts of people being thrown into trucks, put into bags and thrown into trucks and being carted away, dying of COVID almost instantaneously in huge numbers throughout the Wuhan district. But the reality is that's not the way that it appears it actually happened. These people died like I just described to you, in the most Christian area of China, by the way. More Christians in that region than any other part of China. And oftentimes they were still breathing, even if they were unconscious somehow, thrown in bags, thrown in the truck, and taken to the incinerators to protect the rest of the population. And that the COVID itself was just an excuse to wipe out a huge population, to take them out of the game, and that they've been disappeared out of the system. Now, that ability to manipulate the radio frequencies. Imagine that you're walking. There's a Gary Larson is a cartoonist. There's a great cartoon by Gary Larson that I've just some of the stuff he came up with when he was actively doing stuff. He retired years ago. It's just phenomenal how your mind can be that baked and funny. And he has this cartoon of a goldfish in a blender and somebody with their finger right over the button of the blender, and the goldfish, how long can you live in that situation? Any moment, and your goldfish puree, right? But I think that's the way we actually have to think about what's going on with specifically the 5G towers, the broadcast systems around not just America, but around the world. You can have a lot of threats. We had hacking that occurred for example, on a gas pipeline out on the East Coast a couple of years ago and shut off the gas flow. Well, if somebody was able to affect the flow of fuels through pipelines around the country or around the world at the same time, you could really hurt um, uh, everything that makes America work or other countries. We have a lot of pipelines. People don't realize how dependent you are on the flow of fuel through pipelines for airports. You know, there are no storage tanks really of any great size at airports. It's all pumped in on pipelines. The fuel, the gas, uh, uh, natural gas for heating homes across America or in the Northeast, the fuel going to refineries and leaving refineries from lots of locations. If somebody could hack those operations in mass in various parts of the world, or even a small percentage, but a key choke point, you could really disrupt the operations of the country. If you could mess with the electric grid, you could really disrupt operations across the country. But there would be a reaction time. There would be room, maybe adjust or move out of the way or get wood for your fireplace or something, go to grandpa's house, move into your motorhome for a few days. With the threat from the cell phone situation, if hackers were able to get into the system, could they, in a moment, do something that could kill hundreds or even thousands of people in just a few minutes or hours before they could be detected? How would you have to react to that to stop it? What would you do? And a lot of those systems are backed up with generators right there on the site. So would you have to go out and disrupt every last one of them in place somehow? What would that look like? There's questions about just how vulnerable we are on lots of different fronts. If you're gonna, we say kind of lightly that we're in a worldwide war with some type of globalista cabal. I use the image of Spectre from the James Bond movies because it's really like that. It's multiple criminal organizations with some type of mutual interest to, each in their own lane, manage and control human trafficking, gambling, oil or textiles or any number of other things, markets, and they work together under some type of central management, ultimately Lucifer, the devil himself, if you will. But at the end of the day, they're all working together, these various things, but you don't consider what's right there in all of these James Bond films. Ian Fleming thought, I've referenced it other times, that there was some kind of evil genius intent to own and control the world, and along the way to depopulate the world. Moonraker, the guy is going to go up, set up a space station, bunch of people like Noah, men and women. They're going to repopulate the earth after killing everything on the earth with these orchids, all the humans, and then come back, 50, 100 years, and they're going to repopulate the world with their species, their people. In fact, in China, several times over the last several thousand years, China has gone through depopulations with the various leaders and warlords. Up to 90% of the population destroyed, killed, murdered, so that only their people could own and control the repopulation of China. Think about that. This isn't even new to many of these cultures. Well, it's not just China. Look at all of these communist countries. Look at what happened in Russia. You had Stalin starved out whole regions, 50 million people probably more, died when Stalin wouldn't let them plant grain up in the Ural, Ukraine regions and others. He starved out 50 million people. Well, they didn't think like he did. They had certain religious things. They didn't fit in a world that he envisioned, that he wanted. So rather than fight them all one by one or leave a chance, go kill them all, and then we'll start over. Uh, because you're not going to be able to get them to work with you, and it's easier to just wipe them all out. As Stalin said, the death of one man is a tragedy. The death of a million, that's just a statistic. Okay. You don't see the faces. You don't know them personally. You don't know their story. They're all gone. Yeah, but this one was super productive. This one was, very imaginative. This one was very funny. It doesn't matter. They're all gone. We'll start over. And that's the real mentality of some of these monsters that we're dealing with. So now we come back to 10 days of darkness. To what end? To what purpose? You probably can't resolve or fix a lot of these problems over time. Are we going to go in and just take care of a cell tower here or there, look at the programming in a couple different places, talk to the different companies and try to work through all the details? You're not going to get deep enough. In gaming this out, the safest and most effective way with the least risk to the population, dead stop, shut it all down. Now, before you do that, you have to have what we call steerage in ships. You need to have a certain momentum before you shut everything down that allows the rudder system to still keep you going a certain direction, keeps things going so you get as straight and even keel as you can. Shut it all down. You can coast a little bit. You're not quite subject to the will of the currents or the wind as much. You got to be in a relatively safe location when you do it. But when you shut it down completely and reboot the system and restart. In that period of time, we can go in and take some corrective action in the most sensitive locations. Cut off certain inputs and access from, let's say, hackers, take certain of those systems completely offline and change some of what's in the software, not allow things to come back on that are highly risky until we have complete control. So emergency broadcast system could come on and things like that. But even during that 10 days, you probably have nothing. No power, no anything. It's like an EMP went off. And you're not communicating with grandma. You're not using your satellite phone because the satellites aren't working. We're shutting her all down, baby. And then as things come back online, we can control that they are cleared, approved, we have control of it, and it's all okay, because you're talking about the largest military operation ever conceived of anywhere to do that. And then begin a methodical restart of the world, if you will. It's a near-death experience, after which, as we come back alive and aware, then we're given the information that helped to explain what just happened, why it happened. Even where we have a large population that has been paying attention, understand, for the most part, even within a population like your audience here in this show, they just don't have enough details to fully grasp what's at stake, how extensive it must be, what's going on, so that they can do the mental gymnastics, the calculations to see it all. You can't expect somebody that, is doing, normal life. I don't care what the job is. to conceive of this type of a military attack that the world is under and the tools that are available to them. You have to just pause, recapture all of it, reboot the system, and only allow the stuff to come back on that's relatively safe. And let me add one last thing here, John, in the context of that. Some of the tools that have been used against America and the world are literally like they're out of a sci-fi novel. It's not that they're actually that complex. It's that you don't get to see or play with them in the world that you live in your general life. If I had brought a microwave to your home, let's say in 1920, electricity is out. People now have light bulbs. It's common, even with rural electrification in various regions. People commonly have telephones, even though it's a shared party line, numerous people on the same phone line. But you're getting brought up to speed. But I bring in a microwave oven, and I plug it in, and I show you that I can heat a cup of coffee up in 1 minute. I can, cook something in just a couple of minutes. To most people, the shiny, the rapidity, all the others, I could have just as well come from Mars. I could have come from another galaxy. It was not even something that was in their thought process. So it's a couple generations of technicality beyond where they were at. Now, you might have the kid that's read a sci-fi plot or movie or something like that and goes, well, that's just an advanced technology. We just haven't quite got there yet. But it would surprise them. But it wouldn't be completely unimaginable to some, but to most, it would be otherworldly. The weapons that are being used right now that are in play, and I used, for example, Lahaina, the fires in California along the Pacific coast a few years ago, and several dozen now other locations around the world that we've seen similar stuff. There is a military grade type of weapon system that's being used using lasers and microwaves, a specific combination that allows you to hit very precisely targets with extremely intense. It's not heat; it's a molecular resonance. Heats something up very quick, like a microwave does, or like in an oven or something like that, in a very precise location. And that's being used on civilian populations to affect change rapidly that allows for certain groups to come in and put their own things in place, rebuilding the world, one line at a time.
Sure.
And we have to address, because some of that technology is actually compact enough and loose enough that you now have a risk that people with simple aircraft and drones could engage that and affect small areas, very effectively. We have to capture and stop that, whether it be at the nation state level or some mob level. There was a moment where we had to put automatic weapons and heavy automatic weapons in the hands of law enforcement because the crime families, the mobsters, were using BARs and other stuff, fully automatic Thompson machine guns, and the police officer with a pistol on his belt couldn't begin to address it. It wasn't just back in that time. We had the same thing out there in North Hollywood years ago, and the guys come in with full body armor to rob a bank and heavy weapons, and the police officers had to go to a gun store. to get heavier rifles, because the light rifles that they were using for law enforcement purposes, those guys were wearing military grade armor and weapons, and the police weren't prepared for it. Out across the world, this near-death experience they had, in my opinion, is about a pause that has to happen to allow some of the work to be done with the least risk to the people. When you have that 10 days of darkness, that full stop, that full pause, you're hunkered down. You really can't go anywhere. And where are you going to go? You're going to go to the gas station to get gas? Well, the pumps don't work at the gas station. You're going to go to the grocery store. Well, the credit card machine doesn't work at the grocery store. You're, going to walk next door to grandma's house, down the street to your friend's house. You may not want to use the last ounce of gas you have in your car, because even once the darkness is over, it might not be fully functional the same way for days or even weeks. And it's like the beginning of the COVID thing. There's a full stop pause.
Mhm.
And then we bring systems back online, and you'll have the national broadcast system in play to explain what's going on, but not during the 10 days of crickets, not total silence.
Mhm.
And unfortunately, be left in the lurch somewhat. Why? Because even with the emergency broadcast system, you'll hear it on your radio, uh, your little 9-volt radio, but your power to your house may not be on, most likely won't. And it may be a bit more regional in some areas, but I think it's fairly universal across the country. Even if you're running your generator at home, for that period of time, you might not have emergency broadcast system going even at that for you to receive.
You know,
You may be broadcasting it, but you're not in a position to
mhm.
hear it because you don't have power for your own stuff. So go ahead. I'm sorry, John.
No, it's fascinating. I've taken a page full of notes here. We're going to conclude in a moment, but I'm just curious. I'm more than likely, I mean, we don't know the trigger date of this event, but in my little crystal ball, it's coming before November, and probably a lot sooner than one may think. Just my opinion. That being said, should it play out that way? I'm in Southeast Asia. I'm very curious to see how global this is. Uh, uh, just a point of personal curiosity, but I'd like to just say to everybody listening to listen again to all this. There's a reason for the setup and the dialogue that Juan walked us through, which is also quite the education. And you know, in my mind, be prepared. I lived for many years in the hurricane state. Think of it like a long-term hurricane. Get all the things you need to sustain yourself, plan, prepare physically, mentally, survival things, spiritually, protection, of course, prayer. Stay inside. We've been advised along this journey over these years during this period of time, and and it will pass. Then the sun goes the planet moves, whatever this planet is, whether it's a flat or round or who knows what, but daylight comes and
It's
daylight
round.
goes. And,
It's round,
okay.
just so you know.
All right. And darkness passes, and this 10 days of darkness, serious stuff's getting accomplished. And those that do follow Q or did follow Q got some assurances through that message board. And my advice, for whatever it's worth, is plan and prepare. And all storms come and go, and so will this one, except this storm we're in charge of, and the outcome is going to be quite uh, much better than, as Juan stated earlier. I can't read all the scrambled notes here, but we'll go back. We can either go backwards to the example you gave of your friend who passed on. You go backwards to the world that we one once had, or we can create the new one. And I think, in my opinion, this 10 days of darkness gives us the ability to create a new world. I am going to sign us off here. I want to thank you, Juan, for sharing all that insights and information about frequencies and such, and some of the horrific ways they've been used and what may be coming down the pike. Why all this, folks? Because we're at war. And when things don't add up, we don't have a lot of answers to questions because it's a psyop war, it's an information war, it's an intelligence battle. We get what we can and we look in certain corners for information, but everything will be okay in the end. If it's not okay, it's not the end. Never give up and have faith. And we must unite in truth, not in politics or religion, particularly at this time. Why? They're deliberately divisive. And remember, where we go one, we go all. Stay safe. God is with us always. See you next week.